Your favorite movies, if any?
Oh, I watch a lot of movies. My wife and I, for a very long time, have had this, once a week we'll go and see some movie, although that's been kind of decaying recently because there haven't been so many movies out. But, and then there was a pandemic, of course, which didn't help. But I don't know, I saw 2001 Space Odyssey back in 1968 when it first came out. It was actually the first movie I saw in an actual movie theater.
Stanley Kubrick, yeah.
Yes. I would say that was interesting as a kind of image of the future, and was kind of inspirational image of the future. I kind of wrote about that in the 50th anniversary of 1968, and kind of realized, that was a sort of important movie for me. I mean, movies I've liked, many movies, I suppose, and I a lot of other kind of science fiction-y movies that in some ways I like the Doctor Strangelove movie, for example. That was one that I liked. I mean, some of these movies I like more for the arc of their story necessarily than all the details. Like Contact was one that I found that was interesting. I mean, I've seen so many movies, and many of them that were I think one of the things, I've seen endless kind of from the rom-com movie to the action adventure to the whatever else. I mean, most categories. I don't do horror movies. I don't do some of these other more I do pretty mainstream categories, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But I've seen a lot of them, and it's I suppose I
Do you rewatch any of them?
Not usually.
Just
I have a even like there was a movie Arrival that was a good movie that I happened to work on a bit, and I saw it before it came out, and I saw it when it came out.
That's the only time you watched the movie twice.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that one again. I mean, I really should watch it again because people keep on saying it's really a good movie, and I did think it was a good movie. I mean, it developed very, very well.
You were a science consultant on that movie. What was your interaction with Hollywood?
Well, I've interacted with Hollywood a bunch of times on a bunch of different things. I mean, Hollywood is probably the industry where the noise to signal ratio is higher than any other, and it's kind of like it's it's often one contributes something and it's in some script somewhere, and a decade later something completely different comes out and who knows what happened. Or sometimes it's like they're just some it ends up being there's some T-shirts that we sort of contribute that show up as props in a movie or whatever else. This was a case where the movie was very close to being shot, and I guess they wanted some sort of science backgrounds and things, and they contact us, and that happens fairly often. And for some reason, the person who was doing PR for us at the time was like, "Oh, this is an interesting script. You should read it." So I read the script. It wasn't really clear what the script. At the time, the movie was called "Story of Your Life" or something, which is a very weird, doesn't sound science fiction. And I realize it's an alien first contact movie. Okay, I'm interested in that whole question. And it's like, I don't really know how this is going to turn out. And then I asked around the company because they needed a bunch of software development stuff, and everybody was like, "Oh, we don't want to work on this movie." And actually my younger son, Christopher, was like, "Oh, I'll work on this movie." And he's a very fast coder, so that really helps. And so he did a bunch of work on actually producing, the code and the images you see in the movie. And then we spent a few days actually on the set, and I think the dynamic of, oh, can you produce this thing? And then Christopher's like, yeah, I can write some code that does that. Okay, here's a bunch of pictures. And it's like the art director was like, okay, great, we'll take this one, and stick them up on the set. And then, they film that piece, and there it's in the movie. And that movie has the unusual feature that the code you see in the movie is actually making the pictures that it shows that it's making, and that's basically all Christopher's code. I think my efforts were mostly sort of script type things. I guess I spent an afternoon with the chap who was playing a physicist in that movie, a person called Jeremy Renner, I guess the producers and director of the movie were sort of like, well, you should meet somebody who's actually done physics, and it was kind of an interesting process to sort of, how do you try and provide the sort of the ethos of what a physicist in action, which is kind of what was playing in that movie, what do they do? So tried to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually then in post-production for that movie, they really wanted a whiteboard that would have a bunch of, what the physicists might have been talking about for that movie. But they needed it to be, have just this gap in the whiteboard, because that's where Amy Adams, who'd been one of the actors in the movie, had been in front of the whiteboard, and they, had to composite, her in front of the whiteboard. So anyway, I drew this whiteboard, which I think only a tiny piece of it ended up getting used. The only thing that was interesting about it was I wrote a blog post about it afterwards, and I gave the full whiteboard and the whole kind of theory of graviton lasers and all kinds of things that I made up as a kind of plausible, how do you make an interstellar spacecraft type thing. And I was super amused to get some email from some physicists saying, oh, that's kind of interesting. We've written a paper analyzing, how this works. Now, it wasn't, I made it up because it wasn't totally ridiculous and was kind of interesting. And, I don't know whether that's how things could actually work. But I thought that was a fun kind of fact follows fiction type dynamic.